Welcome to Empower Migra.
Thank you.
Here on this show, we take scientific studies on things like migration, integration, and, discrimination.
Yeah.
And we really try to break them down, but entirely without the academic jargon.
Right, none of the confusing stuff.
Exactly, because in every single deep dive we do, we ask one really simple foundational question. What does the research actually say?
And, well, what parts of that research completely contradict what so many people out there believe to be true?
Yeah. We're always looking for the actual mechanisms behind the headlines. And to help us do exactly that, I'm joined by our resident expert who is, going to guide us through some incredibly robust data today.
Thanks. I mean, it's great to be here.
So I want to start by asking you, the listener, to just imagine a scenario. It's an everyday situation, really.
Yeah.
Imagine you arrive in a new country, and at first, you just have this profound feeling of, opportunity. You feel like you have chances. You feel really welcome.
Right, that initial honeymoon phase.
Yeah, exactly. But then as time passes, you start to notice a shift.
A subtle one, usually.
Yeah, really subtle. You realize you're being treated differently. You start getting rejected a lot more frequently.
Whether it's jobs, housing, whatever.
Right. And you get this creeping feeling that you don't actually belong. Now, here is a really honest, candid question. If that feeling of belonging changes over time, if it just sort of fades away, is it because of something you did?
Or could it be that the environment around you has changed?
Exactly, because there is this massively widespread narrative in our society.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you hear it everywhere.
You do. A lot of people genuinely believe that if integration doesn't work, it lies entirely on the migrants themselves.
Right. Like always framed as a personal failure.
Yeah. Too little adaptation, too little effort, or just, too little motivation.
Like they just aren't trying hard enough.
Exactly. But we have to ask, is that actually true? Or are we missing a really critical piece of the puzzle here?
Well, looking purely at individual motivation it's completely ignoring the structural realities that people are facing every single day.
Which brings us to the study we are going to deep dive into today.
Yes.
It's a 2025 report from DIW Berlin. That's the German Institute for Economic Research. And it has a really striking title. It's called Welcome Feeling Crumbles. Refugees Perceive Discrimination in the Labor and Housing Market.
Yeah, authored by Philippa Cumming and Ellen Heidinger.
Right. So what exactly are they looking at here?
So they're examining how refugees perceive their everyday experiences in Germany and, crucially, how their sense of belonging evolves or crumbles over time.
Which is so important because, we're not just talking about abstract numbers on a spreadsheet here.
No, definitely.
We are talking about the actual measurement of human experience.
And societal health, really. I mean, this affects the daily reality for so many people.
Let's get right into the data. What did the study actually use as its source material?
Well, the foundation of this is the socioeconomic panel, or the SOEP.
Okay, the SOEP. I've heard of that, but what is it, practically speaking?
It's basically one of the most powerful tools we have in European sociological research. It's a longitudinal panel data set.
And longitudinal means?
It means they don't just, poll a random 1,000 people today and then a completely different random 1,000 people next year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they actually follow the exact same households, the exact same individuals, year after year after year.
Wow, okay, so they're tracking the actual trajectory of a specific person's life over time.
Exactly. And for this specific report, the authors looked at data spanning from 2016 all the way to 2023.
That's a huge chunk of time.
It is. We are talking about over 29,000 observations of refugees.
Wow.
And because they track the same people, the researchers can actually control for baseline personality traits.
Wait, I want to stick on that for a second because, self-reporting bias is always the very first criticism you hear with these kinds of studies.
Oh, definitely.
People will say, well, look, some people are just naturally more pessimistic. They're just grumpier, so they're going to perceive everything as discrimination.
Right, the grumpy baseline argument.
Yeah. How does tracking them over time solve that?
It's actually a really brilliant statistical mechanism. Look at it this way. If an individual is naturally pessimistic, they were probably pessimistic in 2016 too.
Right, that makes sense.
So if that same individual's perception of feeling welcome suddenly drops significantly between 2016 and 2023,
then you can't blame the drop on their baseline pessimism.
Exactly. The pessimism was already baked into the 2016 baseline. The change, that massive drop, has to be driven by actual external experiences during that time period.
Okay, that is super clear. It just filters that whole argument right out.
Precisely.
Huh.
And alongside that longitudinal data, they also used highly detailed cross-sectional data from 2022.
Okay.
That involved over 2,400 refugees, focusing specifically on their subjective experiences of discrimination in three main areas:
Which were...
the workplace, the search for a job, and the search for housing.
Let's talk about the overarching trajectory first. From 2016 to 2023, what did the researchers actually find about this feeling of being welcome?
Well, the numbers paint an incredibly stark picture. So back in 2016...
Which was right around the time of the large influx of refugees, right?
Exactly. During a time when the whole culture of welcome was this huge dominant public theme in Germany. At that time, 83% of refugees reported feeling welcome.
Wait, 83%?
Yes.
That is a massive majority.
It really is. It shows that the initial reception, at least subjectively for the newcomers, was overwhelmingly positive.
Okay, so a great start. But then what happened?
Well, as they tracked those exact same individuals year by year, a steady decline started around 2018.
Oh.
And by the time we hit 2023, that number had plummeted down to 65%.
Wow, so nearly 1 in 5 people who initially felt super welcome just completely lost that feeling over a few years.
Correct. But here's the thing. They didn't just measure the absence of a welcome feeling.
What else did they measure?
They also measured active distress. So they tracked worries about xenophobia and hostility.
Okay.
In 2016, about 32% of refugees expressed these active worries. That number crept up steadily, and by 2023, it hit a record high of 54%.
Wait, 54%? More than half?
Yes. Over half of the refugee population in this massive study is living with active worries about xenophobia.
Jumping from 32% to 54%, that is definitely not some statistical anomaly. That is a trend.
Exactly. It's a huge shift.
So what's the environmental context for this? Like, what was happening in 2023?
Well, the researchers point out that statistical shifts of this magnitude don't just happen in a vacuum.
Right.
2023 was a year marked by really intense public debates regarding migration policy. There were increased discussions about deportations.
I remember that.
And there was a highly visible rise in anti-migration positions in the political discourse all across Europe, really.
So basically, the public discourse sets the weather.
That's a really good way to put it. When the public sphere becomes so saturated with, group-focused enmity, it broadcasts this unavoidable message of exclusion.
Yeah, you can't escape it.
But the researchers pose a really interesting question here. Public discourse is one thing, but where does this actually physically manifest in a person's daily life?
Right. Where are they actually hitting the walls?
Right.
Let's transition to that 2022 cross-sectional data, because this is where the mechanisms of exclusion get very concrete.
Yes.
Well, we're looking at the 3 pillars: the workplace, the job search, and the housing market. Let's start with the workplace.
Okay, so when it comes to individuals who are already employed, they have a job, they are participating in the economy, 14% of refugees report experiencing discrimination at the workplace.
I am kind of stuck on this idea of workplace discrimination.
How so?
Well, how can researchers possibly measure something like subtle exclusion in a massive data set? Like, if someone is just a bad cultural fit for a company, or they get passed over for a promotion just because, I don't know, their German isn't quite good enough yet.
Right.
They might perceive that as discrimination. How do we separate legitimate workplace friction from actual bias?
That's always the crux of the debate when we talk about perceived discrimination.
Yeah.
But the SOEP survey asks specifically if the individual feels they were disadvantaged because of their background, not just, if they had a bad day or a tough boss.
Oh, okay, that's a key distinction.
And yes, perception is subjective, but sociologists look at aggregate patterns.
Meaning
When 14% of a specific demographic consistently reports workplace discrimination, and this correlates with independent field experiments.
Wait, what kind of experiments?
Well, there are studies showing that job applicants with foreign-sounding names are significantly less likely to be invited to interviews,
Right.
even with identical resumes.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So when you combine that, the subjective perception strongly aligns with objective, verifiable systemic bias.
Okay, so it's the aggregate that proves the pattern.
Exactly. And at the workplace, discrimination often takes the form of subtle exclusion.
Give me an example of that.
It's not necessarily someone shouting a slur in the hallway.
Right.
It's being consistently assigned the least desirable tasks, despite having the exact same qualifications as your native-born peer.
Ah.
It's microaggressions, having your competence constantly questioned. Or being left out of informal networking channels like, after-work drinks, where crucial promotions are actually decided.
Yeah, and over time, those micro-exclusions just accumulate.
Precisely.
And what about the next pillar, the search for a job?
When refugees are actively searching for a job or an apprenticeship, the reported rate of discrimination jumps up to 18%.
Okay.
But the real bottleneck, the area with the absolute highest reported rate of discrimination, is the housing market.
How high?
A full 32% of refugees report experiencing discrimination when looking for an apartment or a house.
32%, nearly a third.
Yes.
Let's really pause on the mechanics of that.
Yeah.
I mean, you need shelter. It is the most foundational tier of human needs. And almost 1 in 3 times you attempt to secure it, you are hit with bias. Let's do a deep dive into the housing market specifically. Why is housing such a hotspot for this?
If we look at the structural reality, the housing market in Germany, especially in urban centers, is incredibly strained.
Yeah, it's brutal out there.
Demand vastly outstrips supply. So when you have 50 people applying for one single moderately priced apartment who holds all the leverage.
The landlord.
Exactly.
Oh.
Private landlords hold immense discretionary power. And the selection process is, for all intents and purposes, a black box.
What do you mean by a black box?
Well, think about when you apply for a corporate job. There are usually HR departments, standardized interview rubrics, legal compliance checks.
Right, there's a paper trail.
But when you apply for an apartment with a private landlord, they collect your financial data, your credit score, this is Shishufa here in Germany,
Yeah.
and then they just make a highly subjective decision.
And you never know why.
Exactly. You, as the applicant, almost never find out why you were rejected. Was your income-to-rent ratio just slightly too low? Or did the landlord simply prefer the applicant with the traditional German name?
Because the process is entirely opaque.
Right, and because it's opaque, biases, both conscious and unconscious, can operate completely unchecked.
And that brings up a crucial distinction, actually. Are landlords actively saying to themselves, I do not want this demographic in my building? Or is it something more subconscious?
Economists usually divide this into 2 distinct categories: taste-based discrimination and statistical discrimination.
Okay, let's break those down. Taste-based discrimination is what?
That's the overt prejudice you just described. The landlord holds a personal, active animus against a certain group.
Okay, and statistical discrimination.
That is much more insidious. A landlord might not have personal animosity, but they use ethnic origin as a crude proxy for other variables they're worried about.
Like assuming someone with a foreign name might not have a stable income, even if their application packet literally proves they do.
Precisely. Or assuming there might be a language barrier that will make communication difficult when, say, a pipe bursts.
Right.
Instead of evaluating the individual applicant's actual merits, they rely on a prejudiced statistical assumption about the whole group.
But for the person being rejected, I mean, the mechanism doesn't matter.
Not at all. The result is exactly the same. The door remains closed.
And the researchers actually asked the respondents why they felt they were being discriminated against, right? They didn't just guess at the causes.
They did ask, and the data here is incredibly revealing.
What did it show?
Of those who reported experiencing discrimination, a massive 88% pointed directly to their ethnic origin.
Wow.
They cited racist reasons or their origin from another country. This encompasses their name, their language, or their perceived cultural background.
88%. So it is overwhelmingly about the fundamental markers of who they are.
Yes, and here is a totally fascinating point of comparison. 30% of refugees cited their religion or worldview as the reason for the discrimination.
Okay, 30%.
But the researchers compared this specifically to other immigrants.
You mean like non-refugee immigrants?
Yes, people who migrated to Germany in the exact same time frame, often from countries like Poland or Romania, but who did not apply for asylum.
Got it. And what were their numbers?
For those non-refugee immigrants, religion was cited as a reason for discrimination only 9% of the time.
Oh, wow. That is a stark disparity. 30% for refugees versus 9% for other immigrants.
It really is.
Let's unpack the sociology behind that. Why does religion trigger such a vastly different societal reflex depending on the group?
It generally comes down to visible markers and public stigmatization.
What do you mean by visible markers?
Well, many refugees in the SOEP demographic sample come from Muslim-majority countries. Religious markers associated with Islam, particularly the hijab worn by some women, are highly visible.
Right.
In contrast, an immigrant from Poland might be deeply Catholic, but their religion is not immediately visually identifiable to a landlord or hiring manager.
Right, they kind of blend into the visual baseline of the majority culture.
Exactly. When a marker is highly visible, it activates what sociologists call the outgroup homogeneity effect.
The outgroup homogeneity effect.
Yeah. The majority group sees the visible marker, the hijab, for example, and immediately projects a whole host of public debates, stereotypes, and political narratives onto that single individual.
So they stop seeing the person and just see the political debate.
Exactly. The 30% figure shows us that religion for refugees is not just a private belief system, it acts as a highly stigmatized public identifier that triggers systemic hurdles.
That makes total sense.
And furthermore, another 30% of refugees pointed to their physical appearance, like skin color, as the basis for the discrimination.
Man, when you lay all of this out, the 88% pointing to ethnic origin, the 30% for religion, the 32% overall housing rejection rate,
It really paints a picture.
it makes the whole solo sport narrative look incredibly naive. If someone is continuously applying for housing and doors just keep closing because of their name or their skin color.
The message society is sending is not, try harder.
Right. The message is, you are fundamentally not wanted.
And this brings us to what I consider the absolute most groundbreaking part of this DIW study,
Okay, lay it on me.
because it systematically dismantles the idea that if you just play by the rules and get educated, you will naturally overcome these hurdles.
Right. Okay, let's get into the integration paradox, because this was the part of the report that literally made me stop and reread the page twice.
Very counterintuitive.
We talked at the beginning about how the public narrative says education and effort are the keys to belonging.
Yes.
But the data shows something deeply weird regarding refugee women and education. Can you walk us through the regression models here?
Gladly. The researchers wanted to see how different demographic factors impact the probability of perceiving discrimination in the housing market.
Okay.
They mathematically isolated education level, so they held things like income, age, and family size constant.
So we are just looking at the impact of education.
Exactly. And they found that refugee women with a medium level of education, meaning they have at least a secondary school leaving certificate or equivalent vocational training,
Yeah.
they report significantly more discrimination than refugee women with absolutely no educational degree at all.
Wait. I need to make sure I am fully grasping the math here.
It's surprising, I know.
The women who have integrated more deeply into the educational system, who theoretically have better language skills and more earning potential,
Yes.
they are experiencing an increase in discrimination compared to those with no degree. How big is the increase?
It is massive. The models show a 27 percentage point higher probability of perceived housing discrimination for women with medium education compared to those with no degree.
That is staggering. 27 percentage points. Let's clarify the terminology for a second for the listener, because a 27 percentage point increase is very different from a 27% increase, right?
Yes, it is a crucial mathematical distinction.
Break it down.
A 27% increase would mean taking the baseline rate and just multiplying it by 1.27. But a 27 percentage point increase means if the baseline rate of discrimination for a woman with no degree was, say, 10%,
Yeah.
the rate for a woman with a medium degree would jump to 37%.
Oh, wow.
It is an absolute addition to the probability, which makes it a very, very dramatic spike.
But why? Logically, this makes absolutely no sense.
I know.
The whole promise of a meritocracy is that you get the degree, you improve your skills, and you are rewarded with an easier path. Why does the path get steeper?
This is the very core of the integration paradox.
Okay, explain it to me.
It's kind of like a video game. The better you get at the game, the higher your education, the better your language skills, the higher the level you reach.
Right.
But the higher levels do not get easier. They have much harder bosses.
Okay, I like that analogy.
There are two primary mechanisms driving this paradox: exposure and awareness. Let's look at exposure first.
Okay, how does exposure increase discrimination?
Well, think about a woman with no educational degree, perhaps dealing with significant language barriers. She might be restricted to a highly specific, very narrow segment of the housing market.
Like what?
She might rely almost entirely on municipal housing authorities or specific migrant networks or lower-tier private housing, where landlords are already accustomed to renting to marginalized groups.
Okay, so she is essentially operating in a silo.
Exactly. She's in a bubble.
Mhm.
But a woman with a medium education,
Yeah.
she is likely applying for better jobs and trying to move into better, more competitive neighborhoods.
She is leaving the silo.
Yes, she is actively attempting to participate in the broader mainstream housing market. She is competing against middle-class, native-born citizens for the exact same apartments.
Ah, so she's bumping up against entirely different systemic walls.
Yes. Because she is participating more actively, she is exposing herself to a much higher frequency of potential discrimination.
That makes total sense.
She is interacting with landlords who might hold stronger implicit biases or who are using that statistical discrimination we talked about to filter out applicants in a highly competitive bracket.
So the paradox is that by trying to integrate, she steps directly into the crosshairs of mainstream societal bias.
Precisely. That is the exposure mechanism.
Wow. Okay, and what is the awareness mechanism?
Well, with higher education and better language skills comes a much sharper understanding of the host society's norms, rules, and, crucially, its subtle cues.
Right.
You develop a much higher sensitivity to exclusion.
Give me an example.
If you don't speak the language well, and a landlord politely tells you the apartment is already taken, you might just accept it at face value as bad luck.
But if your German is fluent, you can read between the lines.
Exactly. You might notice the subtle shift in the landlord's tone the second they read your name.
Yeah.
Or you might be aware of your legal rights under the General Equal Treatment Act, and you recognize that the questions the landlord is asking are actually illegal.
Right, like asking about your religion or your family planning.
Exactly. So not only are you exposed to more bias because you're in a wider market, but you are structurally equipped to recognize it when it happens.
It's like turning the lights on in a really dirty room.
That's a good way to put it.
The dirt was always there, but education gives you the ability to see exactly how filthy it actually is.
That is exactly what the integration paradox reveals.
Yeah.
Trying harder and getting educated does not shield you from discrimination.
Ironically, it makes the discrimination more visible, more frequent, and psychologically much more taxing.
Exactly.
Which completely shatters the idea that if someone feels alienated, they just aren't trying hard enough. The data literally proves that the hardest triers are feeling the most alienation.
It really flips the script.
Now, the study also breaks down the data geographically, right? Looking at the regional realities within Germany.
Yes, it does.
What did they find when they compared East and West Germany?
The geographic differences are statistically significant and very pronounced.
In which direction?
Across all three domains. So the workplace, the job search, and the housing market. Refugee men living in East Germany report a markedly higher probability of perceiving discrimination compared to those living in West Germany.
Can you walk us through the specific numbers on that?
Sure. At the workplace, refugee men and women in East Germany have roughly a 6.5 percentage point higher probability of perceiving discrimination.
Okay.
When actively looking for work, men in the East face a 6 percentage point higher probability.
Right.
And when searching for housing, men in the East report a 6.7 percentage point higher probability of discrimination.
So consistently, across every single metric of economic participation, the environment in the East is perceived as significantly more hostile.
The data is very clear on that.
How do the study's authors interpret this? Are there structural reasons for this divide?
They offer a few highly nuanced explanations that try to avoid simple stereotyping.
Okay, what's the first one?
One major factor is structural economic strain. Parts of East Germany have historically faced higher unemployment rates and more precarious economic conditions than the West.
Right, going back to reunification.
Exactly. And sociological theory suggests that in environments with strained resources, competition for jobs and housing feels a lot more zero-sum to the native population.
Like, if you get a job, that means I don't get a job.
Exactly. And this heightened competition can easily manifest as increased prejudice and discrimination against newcomers, who are viewed basically as economic rivals.
So economic anxiety breeds outgroup hostility.
That is a very well-documented pattern.
What's the other explanation?
Another theoretical framework they point to is called the contact hypothesis.
Contact hypothesis.
Yeah. This theory posits that regular, meaningful interaction between different groups actually reduces prejudice over time.
So just getting to know people.
Exactly. Historically, West Germany has had a much larger immigrant population for a much longer time.
Right, the guest worker programs in the 60s and 70s.
Yes. So the baseline level of everyday contact between native-born citizens and immigrants is just inherently higher in the West.
You see people at the grocery store, at school, at work.
Exactly. In many areas of the East, the demographic composition is different, meaning there is simply less baseline contact.
Which means?
Which allows abstract fears and stereotypes to persist because they aren't being constantly challenged by everyday reality.
It is always easier to fear an abstract concept on the news than to fear your actual neighbor.
Exactly. The researchers note that future studies would need to incorporate highly localized data like down to the specific neighborhood block to fully analyze how the ethnic composition of an area affects discrimination.
Right.
But the undeniable reality on the ground, as measured by the SOEP data, is a markedly colder climate for integration in the East.
We have unpacked a tremendous amount of data here today.
We really have.
I mean, we've looked at the drop from 83% to 65% in feeling welcome. We have seen the active fear of xenophobia spike up to 54%.
Which is huge.
We've dissected the black box of the housing market, where 32% face outright rejection. And we have explored the integration paradox, where education actually increases exposure to bias.
Yeah.
When you synthesize all of this, it demands a complete reevaluation of what integration actually means.
It absolutely does.
So let's look at how the authors interpret this broader societal context. What is their core thesis regarding the mechanics of integration?
Their central data-backed thesis is that integration is fundamentally a two-way street.
A two-way street.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is a reciprocal process. You cannot measure integration simply by looking at the newcomer's language certificates or their employment status.
You have to measure the other side, too.
Exactly. You have to measure the receptivity of the host society.
Because if the society is constantly pushing back, the integration process just stalls, regardless of the individual's personal effort.
Exactly. Experiences of discrimination directly, measurably, and negatively influence integration. It creates this really destructive feedback loop. Well, think about the institutional hurdles we mentioned earlier. If a refugee constantly experiences subtle bias at the job center, or faces a bureaucratic labyrinth that seems designed to exclude them,
Right.
what is the logical psychological response to that?
You just stop going to the job center. You avoid the authorities altogether.
Precisely. You withdraw.
Yeah.
You lose trust in the democratic institutions that are ostensibly there to protect and assist you.
And then what happens?
That leads directly to economic instability because you aren't accessing the training or the support you're entitled to. It leads to social isolation.
The initial motivation to participate in society is just slowly ground down by the friction of constant systemic rejection.
It's exhausting.
It's like the wind on the mountain just becomes too punishing, so you just retreat to base camp. The welcome feeling crumbles.
That's exactly it.
So the big question then becomes, what do we actually do about it? Because diagnosing a systemic failure is one thing, right? Fixing it is another entirely. Could the researchers offer actionable, pragmatic solutions, or is this all just a theoretical exercise?
No, they offered very concrete structural solutions.
Okay.
They recognize that you cannot simply legislate away implicit bias or taste-based discrimination overnight.
Right, you can't just pass a law saying, don't be biased.
Exactly. But you can change the architecture of the systems where that bias operates.
Okay, let's hear them.
I want to highlight the recommendations from the study's co-author, Ellen Heidinger. She states that while state offerings like language courses and orientation are necessary, they are vastly insufficient on their own.
So what's missing?
What is desperately needed are transparent application and allocation processes.
We are talking about fixing the black box of the housing and labor markets.
Yes. She explicitly advocates for anonymized applications and clear, standardized selection criteria.
Let's break down how an anonymized application actually works in practice. How does that solve the problem?
Let's apply it to the housing market. If a property management company uses an anonymized digital portal, the landlord looking at the applications does not see a name, a photograph, an age, or an ethnic origin.
They don't see any of the identity markers.
None. They only see the standardized variables relevant to the lease itself. The credit score, the income level, the employment status, the number of prospective tenants.
So it forces the decision maker to rely strictly on meritocratic criteria.
Exactly. It interrupts that statistical discrimination we talked about earlier.
Right.
If the landlord cannot use a foreign-sounding name as a crude proxy for unreliability, they have to actually judge the applicant on their actual financial reliability.
Now, obviously, anonymity has to end at some point, right? At
Yeah.
the in-person viewing or the actual job interview.
Of course.
So does the bias just kick in then, like delayed discrimination?
It can, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
But studies on anonymized hiring show that getting past that initial screening phase is the biggest hurdle.
Just getting in the door?
Yes. Once a candidate is actually in the room, their individual competence and personality have a chance to override the interviewer's abstract prejudices. Anonymity levels the playing field at the stage where bias is most rampant and least accountable.
That makes profound logical sense. But okay, what about legal protections? Is there a legislative angle to their recommendations?
Yes, there is. The researchers align strongly with recommendations from the Federal Anti-Discrimination Agency in Germany.
Okay, what are they pushing for?
They advocate for expanding the General Equal Treatment Act, which is known as the AGG in Germany.
The OTG. Okay.
Currently, the AGG protects against discrimination based on race, ethnic origin, gender, religion, disability, age, or sexual identity.
Okay, so it covers a lot.
It does, but the recommendation is to explicitly add nationality as a protected characteristic.
Wait, how does adding nationality change things practically? If ethnic origin is already protected, isn't nationality kind of redundant?
You would think so, but not legally.
How so?
A landlord might argue, oh, I didn't reject them because they are of Syrian origin. I rejected them because they don't hold a German passport and I only rent to citizens.
Oh, wow.
Right. Explicitly protecting nationality removes that legal loophole and provides a much stronger footing for combating structural exclusion.
Okay, but that brings up a huge issue of enforcement.
Enforcement is always the tricky one.
What good is a stronger law if the person facing the discrimination doesn't actually have the power to enforce it? If I am a newcomer dealing with a complex new legal system and massive language barriers,
Yeah.
I am not going to hire a high-priced lawyer to sue some landlord who just ghosted my application. I don't have the resources for that.
Which is exactly why the third major recommendation from the DIW report is the massive expansion of independent, low-threshold legal advice centers.
Okay, legal advice centers.
Yes, because rights are only meaningful if they can actually be accessed and enforced. These centers act as the bridge. They provide free or low-cost advocacy. They help document patterns of discrimination, and they can send official warning letters to property managers or employers who violate the AGG.
So it's not just you against a corporation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
By institutionalizing this support, you shift the burden entirely. It is no longer just one isolated, exhausted individual fighting a massive property management firm.
Right.
It is an informed citizen utilizing state-supported infrastructure to demand equal treatment.
It changes the power dynamic entirely.
It really does.
Man, let's pull all of these threads together because we've covered so much ground today.
We really have.
We started this deep dive by asking you, the listener, to imagine a scenario, arriving in a new place, feeling an initial wave of warmth and opportunity, and then just watching that welcome slowly, painfully fade away as you hit invisible walls.
Yep.
Through the lens of the SOEP data, we have seen that this isn't just a subjective feeling.
Not at all.
It is a documented statistical reality for thousands of people over a 7-year period. We have seen how the black boxes of our housing and labor markets allow biases to thrive completely unchecked.
Right.
We have unpacked the devastating irony of the integration paradox, proving that trying harder, getting educated, and attempting to climb the ladder doesn't actually erase the barriers.
No, it just forces you to collide with them more frequently.
Exactly. The data completely dismantles the myth that integration is a solo sport, entirely dependent on the motivation of the newcomer.
It proves that integration is an ecosystem.
It is a two-way street.
Yeah.
So I want to leave you with a final objective thought to consider based on all the mechanics we've explored today.
Mm-hmm.
What happens to the structural integrity of a society when a huge segment of its population is initially welcomed, but is then systematically forced to watch that feeling evaporate?
It's a huge question.
If a society demands that newcomers adapt and participate, but constantly changes the locks on the doors of the housing and labor markets, what kind of societal architecture are we actually building, right? And ultimately, what does the word integration even mean if the sense of belonging is not sustained by the host society, but is allowed to simply crumble away? Just think about the invisible mechanics at play the next time you hear someone casually say, well, they just aren't trying hard enough.
Absolutely.
That was another deep dive from Empower Migra.
Thanks for having me.
Empower Migra understanding begins with listening.